Hi, my name is David Siegel. I am the president of TrackMaster. I am often asked about how our speed figures and class ratings are derived. This presentation is designed to answer those questions. I will tell you nearly everything we do, but one or two things are still proprietary, and those will remain so. But you will get a very clear picture of what we do and why we do what we do by the time this session is over. But before we get there, let me tell you a little bit about TrackMaster. Let's kick that off with showing you a recent 30-second spot, which will give you the general idea.
Ready for the latest advances in handicapping technology? TrackMaster is your solution. With 20+ years of providing a wealth of information, TrackMaster has tools for every level of player. Pocket Handicapper and IPPs by Equibase, revolutionary products for your smartphone and iPad. Drill down to charts and race videos. And with software like Plus Pro, even the most advanced players have sophisticated tools to succeed. The complete source for thoroughbred, quarter horse, and harness racing information. TrackMaster by Equibase, for the serious player.
Okay, well now you have the idea. We do a lot of technical stuff to advance the art and science of handicapping. More important to the subject matter at hand, we have been producing speed figures since 1993, and frankly, I think there are none as good as ours. More on that in a bit. TrackMaster was founded in 1990 as a venture-backed startup. We became Equibase's first value-added reseller in 1991 and launched our first product in 1993, which was a handheld device which included what today would be called an app. Yep, even then we were way ahead of the game. Back then, Apple was still just a seed waiting to sprout. We followed that with the launch of a PC product for DOS, later for Windows, and in 1995, we became the first racing-related company to get on the World Wide Web. We do speed figures and other ratings for both harness and thoroughbred racing, and you will hear me talk about both as we move forward. We signed our initial harness racing agreement back in 1997 and have been producing ratings ever since. And while there are many more milestones I could mention, I will end with our acquisition by Equibase in 2000. Equibase is the thoroughbred industry's official database for racing information, and TrackMaster supplies Equibase with the Equibase Speed Figure, the most widely distributed figure in the industry. Now, just before we get into the meat of the matter, let me define some of the key ratings that we will use. A speed figure is a single number that normalizes horses' finishing times across all distances and surfaces and conditions. The number generally falls between 50 and 140. A pace rating is just like a speed figure, except that it normalizes horses' fractional times across all distances, surfaces, and conditions. For thoroughbred racing, it represents the distance from the start of a race to a specific fractional point of call. For harness racing, it represents a specific segment of a race. So, for a fourth quarter pace rating, it would measure the speed of the horse only for the last 25% of a 1-mile race. A class rating is a measure of the competitive level of a field of horses. It can also be interpreted as the expected winning speed figure for a given race. And finally, before I get into the technical segment of this session, let me describe a little about where you can find these proprietary ratings. Equibase is the official database of thoroughbred racing, and as such, the Equibase Speed Figure is the most widely distributed in the industry. Nearly every live racing program in North America prominently displays the Equibase Speed Figure and early pace rating. In addition, the vast majority of simulcast books include the Equibase Figure along with all of the other essential past performance information. But the widespread use of our acclaimed ratings does not stop with thoroughbred and quarter horse figures. The standardbred industry has access to this very valuable data as well. Nearly every harness product TrackMaster sells on its site, the Equibase website, the iTunes store, and the retail stores of nearly every ADW features TrackMaster speed, class, and pace ratings. And similar to the thoroughbred industry, most of the simulcast books produced include TrackMaster Speed Ratings for harness racing. Now we get into the technical segment of this little seminar. Let's start with the basic building blocks. Our speed figures are made up of 4 primary components. They are the raw speed figure, race-to-race adjustments, track and distance variance, and finally, race variance. I am going to review what each of these components are about and give you some insight about how we calculate them. So I am going to take them now one at a time. So we need a starting point. It can be totally arbitrary, but we need some place to begin. So I pick a class that is run very often with very simple conditions at a track that has a lot of races for this class at various distances. So for the purposes of this exercise, assume I choose a $20,000 open claiming class at Aqueduct. We would then take a look at a few distances that the class is run at the same track. In this example, Aqueduct. We then are able to establish rough equivalent times at different distances for being competitive in this particular class at this particular track. This is the beginning of building parallel times, which get converted into raw speed ratings. We could then further study this type of thing on other surfaces, turf and synthetic, for example, as well as how time and distance are related for common classes at other racing venues. Such an exercise then results in a parallel time chart, which later on we reduce to a single equation, but we will get to that shortly. So let's take a look at the example I just described, using the $20,000 claimer at Aqueduct. Displayed in this example are typical winning times for the 3 race distances, 6 furlongs, 8 furlongs, and 10 furlongs, which is 1.25 miles. Since we will eventually be using equations, we convert all times into seconds, which is why I have them displayed that way in the 3rd column. So we call these times parallel times. And for the purposes of this exercise, I will arbitrarily assign them a value of 90. So for the raw rating, a 90 is the rating for a 1 minute and 10 second 6 furlong race, as well as a 1 minute and 37 second 1 mile race, as well as a 2 minute and 5 second 1.25 mile affair. This is not to say that one particular horse, let's call him Mr. Ed, that can run a 1:10 6 furlong race would run a 2:05 1.25 mile race stretching out. What it says is that a horse of the same class as Mr. Ed could go out and race in 2:05 for the 1.25 mile race. Or more precisely, in this example, $20,000 claimers at Aqueduct race competitively at a speed rating of 90. So circled in this slide, I have the same 3 times at the 3 distances we are considering, all assigned the speed figure of 90 as a starting point. So before you get too antsy over this slide, let's talk about the next step, which is how many speed figure points we have in a unit of time, or in this case, a second. This too could be arbitrary, and there are many ways one could do this, but it was my belief that the relative importance of a rating point should be constant across the board. That means the actual number of points per second would vary with the distance of the race. Here is the logic which I hope will clear things up a bit. I think we would all agree that using time, 1/10 of a second is far less critical in a 2-mile race than it would be, say, in a 220-yard or 1 furlong race. The shorter the distance, the more it makes sense that you measure shorter and shorter time intervals. So if you look at the chart, you will see that a horse that goes 1 second faster at 8 furlongs would get a 100 rating. And a horse that goes 1 second slower would get a rating of an 80. Both moves are 10 points at this 1 mile distance. So regarding our speed figures, we arbitrarily decided that for a 1 mile race, 10 speed rating points per second felt about right. Or to put it another way, each point is equivalent to 1/10 of a second. So with that arbitrary starting point screwed into the ground, it was somewhat easy to proceed. We then thought it appropriate that if the distance were cut in half, for example, that the value of a rating point should be of the same relative importance. Therefore, we would have 20 speed rating points per second for a half-mile race. And conversely, for a race twice as long, in this case 2 miles, would want to have half as many speed rating points per second, or 5 in the case of a 2-mile race. So we can plot these various points, which I have done in this slide. Here you see a couple of the points I mentioned, namely a 1-mile race where there are 10 points per second of time, and a half-mile race, or 4 furlongs, where each second of time is represented with 20 speed figure points. A simple equation can then be associated with a line that reflects this point value difference as a function of distance. Specifically, the number of speed rating points per second is simply 80 divided by the distance of the race in furlongs. So now we have a raw rating for any horse that has a final time at a particular distance run. Remember, this is done similarly for quarter horses and harness racing as well. That brings us to the second primary component of the derivation of the speed figure. Here we have a number of different adjustments we do tied to specific data which is measured and varies from one race to another. I will touch upon 3 of these data elements after going into a little more depth regarding the first race-to-race adjustment, which is the run-up distance. For those of you who do not know, the timer for a thoroughbred race does not start when the gate swings open. The timer begins when one horse breaks the timer beam somewhere between a few feet out of the gate and as much as a couple of 100 feet out of the gate. So in fact, a 6 furlong race is actually always longer than 6 furlongs. This is not an issue to be dealt with in quarter horse racing, as their timer begins when the gate swings open. And in harness racing, every race has roughly the same quarter-mile run-up, though the timer begins when the first horse hits the starting line. So in this section, we will focus on thoroughbred racing only. Now, just think for a minute. All other things held constant, would a horse run faster, say, for a 6 furlong race with a 10-foot run-up or a 100-foot run-up? The answer is clearly the 100-foot run-up, as it takes some time for a horse to accelerate to what I will call his cruising speed. A horse with a 10-foot run-up may hit the starting line going, say, 10 miles per hour, where with a 100-foot run-up, the horse could be at 38 miles per hour. While he runs slightly further and therefore may tire marginally more than with a 100-foot run-up, the extra energy used does not come close to negating the faster starting speed. So, to make a long story not so long, we studied horses' acceleration, drawing from independent studies and our own study of quarter horse times. After that exhaustive research, we came up with a simple equation which translates to a race-by-race adjustment for run-up distances. You can see that it can take up to about 10 seconds, or just under 1/8 of a mile, to reach cruising speed. Our run-up adjustment then normalizes the effects of run-ups, which can vary from one race to the next, even at the same distance at the same track. It should be noted that all TrackMaster and Equibase program pages include run-ups where, to the best of my knowledge, no one else does. More important to know, though, is that our speed our speed figures already reflect such run-up variances, so you, as a player, don't have to be concerned about it. You just have to know that other figures out there may not take them into account. Moving along, another factor that can vary race to race is wind. We did an exhaustive study regarding the effect of wind on speed and time. The conclusion was that a headwind hurts a horse more than a tailwind helps, and crosswinds always slow horses down. So net, wind has an adverse effect on speed, but that's pretty obvious. What we have done is quantify these effects, the results of this quantification being reflected in our quarter horse speed figures. Unfortunately, wind speed and direction is not recorded for thoroughbred or harness racing, so we cannot reflect that which is not measured. TrackMaster takes any new data element and studies it for its effect on the speed figures. Items that are related to track conditions such as humidity, depth of the track, and temperature, for example, could be measured and then reflected in the race-by-race adjustments to better hone in on changing conditions. When that occurs, you can be sure that such elements will be reflected in our updated algorithms. Finally, we have carefully studied the effect of post position for all three major breeds. The upshot is that for quarter horses and thoroughbreds, post positions did not have a measurable impact on speed, on average. While one may think they should, as inside horses have a shorter distance to travel, the data did not bear this out. Perhaps angles into turns and crowding factors negated the shorter distance traveled factor. However, in harness racing, post position has a huge influence. So for every track in North America, we measure this effect. And in fact, we measure it every year and update our data for changes due to the post effect. So in harness racing, it is almost a certainty that a horse that lost by a nose coming out of the 8-hole on a half-mile track would get a better speed figure than the winner that came out of the 1-hole. So now we have a raw figure with some race-specific adjustment. This brings us to the third component, namely our track distance variant, or what we sometimes refer to as the inter-track variant. To make a consistent and accurate figure, we need to measure typical speed differences between each track, course, distance combination. Even within a racetrack, a 6-furlong race may play a little slower than the parallel time would suggest for the same class of horses at 8 furlongs. Such variation is explained primarily by the size and shape of the track, as well as other factors like the degree of bank in the turns, prevailing winds, or even slight inclines in the racing surface. Ideally, we would program a robotic horse expending the same energy level to go around each course and compare the differences in raw speed ratings. These differences could be averaged and calculated and then recorded as a track distance variant. Unfortunately, no such robot exists to my knowledge, so we have simulated the exercise through a complex and detailed study of shippers. So let's say in a completely hypothetical example that we had 30 unique horses race at Golden Gate Fields at 6 furlongs over the course of a few months. Assume all of these were aged horses and that the track condition was listed as fast. Assume that these starts averaged a raw speed figure of 82. Now these same horses also raced during the same months at Hollywood Park at 6 furlongs, and their raw speed figures averaged 86. We would then conclude that Hollywood's 6-furlong course was 4 points faster than that of Golden Gate Fields, for whatever the reason. So, if we were using the raw ratings, we would subtract 4 points from every Golden Gate rating to compare them to Hollywood Park ratings. The process itself starts with one track and one distance, and then propagates through all of North America, so we end up with a track distance variant for every track, course, and distance run. Of course, if there is only, say, one race at 2 miles at Podunk Downs during the year, we won't have enough data to be statistically significant to derive a variant. Don't worry, we handle these oddball situations another way, and I will get to that in a second. But for now, the track distance element, a crucial one for speed figure development, is attained through a detailed shipper study. As I had mentioned earlier, since tracks change over time, we do such a study every year to measure the effect of any such changes. So what do we do when very few races are run at a particular distance? While there are very few instances of such races, we have created a series of other methods to deal with speed figures that need to be computed for these races. I will get to these shortly. So that takes care of 3 of the 4 essential pieces of the speed figure puzzle. So now we move on to the 4th element, the race variant. The race variant can be thought of as a daily track variant, except that is a bit of a misnomer, as while there could be just one race variant for an entire day at a particular track, there could also be a number of variants. For sure, there would be at least one variant for each different race course during a day, say the dirt course and turf course. But there could be more if conditions measurably change during the course of a race card. Having multiple variants for the same course is a balancing act of changing conditions versus having enough data in the sample size to be statistically meaningful. Race variants are created by examining actual winning speed ratings against the expected winning speed rating. For example, in a card with 10 races, if every race went 5 speed rating points faster than expected, it is reasonable to conclude that the track was 5 points fast on that day. If that was the case, our race variant would be -5, and we would subtract 5 points from each rating to normalize the final ratings for that day. So that means we need an expected speed rating for the winner of each race. I have referred to this rating earlier, and we call it the class rating. So let me digress for a short while and explain to you how we calculate the class rating. Once again, a class rating measures both the competitive level of any particular race and doubles as the expected winning speed figure of said race. The class rating, most of the time, is calculated using a proprietary algorithm related to recent speed figures of the field. These figures were analyzed over hundreds of thousands of races, the result of which is a way to use these recent historic ratings to predict the winning rating for a given field of horses. This method is used in over 95% of the races and provides proper expected winning ratings to calculate race variance. Sometimes, though, there are not enough speed ratings to derive a statistically relevant class rating. At the extreme, this would always happen with the first 2-year-old race of the year, where there are no past performances and therefore no historic speed ratings. We use a variety of methods in this situation. One such method takes a look at several years of data from the same class as today's race. Using the 2-year-old example I cited earlier, we would look for historic 2-year-old races at the track in question with the same conditions and determine what the typical winning speed figure would be. This method generally would address nearly all other domestic races. Still, there could be a case where we would not only have no PPs for a group of horses, but possibly no similar race was run at the track. In those very rare instances, we estimate a class rating based on conditions and the purse of the race for a given track. The last situation for class ratings is related to foreign horses that are imported into the US. We do assign speed figures and class ratings for such starts, but these are done with a very different methodology, which I will touch on a little bit later. So all horses can be judged on the same speed figure scale. We compute such figures for every historic race that would show up in a North American race program, so long as we have the basic data for each historic start. Okay, so let's move along to some of the other special cases I mentioned earlier. The first outlying situation is when there is no track distance variant. This would occur when there are very few races run on a particular course at a particular track at a particular distance. An example would be a 1.5 mile race on the dirt at Belmont Park, which is the distance of the Belmont Stakes. There are very few, if any, other races run at this distance at Belmont. To address such situations, we have perfected algorithms that take into account the class rating, the winner's margin of victory, the winner's recent speed rating achievements, and how bunched the horses are at the conclusion of the race. From this, we can bypass the need for a track distance variant and calculate a final speed rating. The next special case involves significantly changing conditions during the day. During the day, official track conditions can change, but even with a fast track, crews can do things to change the nature of the surface, or on a rain-beaten track that can start sloppy, it can become even sloppier as the card progresses. Our computers model these changes by grouping races with common track conditions, and also model trends through the card and adjust the race variance accordingly. When a winning speed figure is way out of whack with the expected winning speed figure, again, also known as the class rating, our computers take a closer look. We look at the horse's history, other horses' history, and other races on the day to figure out if the horse just happened to run really, really fast, or if there was something done to the track for that one race. This combination of art and science meet in the programming of these cases, and in some rare cases, it results in a further modification to the speed figures of a particular race. The final piece of the puzzle is foreign horses that are imported to race in North America. We thought it very important to measure these horses' foreign performances with our scale of speed figures. The use of third-party figures is kind of useless when you are comparing them to domestic running lines. So we did a bunch of regression analysis, which takes a look at key data elements to see how they relate to performance, and a ton of modeling where we can use some essential elements of past performance lines, and we use these to derive a speed figure. Each track around the world has a different index or rating, and we digest the class and the conditions of the race. Along with the purse and track condition, we can then use the horse's final time to get a figure. While this method does not have the same amount of excruciating detail behind the figure as our domestic figures do, it is sufficiently accurate to approach the efficacy of our domestic figures. Well, that's really it. That is how we calculate our speed figures and class ratings. Pace ratings are done the same way as speed figures, only for the relevant segment of the race. But before I close out these educational issues, let me mention a few other important items of note. I mentioned earlier that with respect to track distance variance, we use a shipper study to determine the underlying speed differences from track to track, course to course, and distance to distance. Well, tracks change over time, so sticking with the same variance would be foolish. So we run this study annually and record the results, so for each year we have a different set of variance. Most of the time, things don't change very much, but when they do, we capture these changes. Just after the first of the year, we also go back and rerun the shipper study for the year just completed, and then rerun all of the speed figures. Since the track distance variance may have changed from the year prior, the resulting speed figures and ratings may slightly change as well. Since the current year's ratings are used by handicappers for the following year, it makes sense to get the best possible numbers for the year just completed. So we do a massive annual rerun of everything. We also do reruns of data during the year, for specific tracks under special circumstances. Let's say, for example, that Keeneland altered the banking of its turn during the winter. We would do a rerun of the shipper study once enough time has passed to have meaningful data, say about 30 days, and then rerun all of the associated speed figures. Similarly, when a new track opens, we use one of our alternate methods for calculating speed figures until we have enough data to run a shipper study, and then we rerun all of the ratings for that new track. Another item of special interest to touch on is the human element. It is my strong belief that the human element does not belong in the day-to-day generation of figures and ratings. Let me repeat that. I feel that there should never be a situation where a human is making a judgment based on feel and observation that affects a speed figure. First, it is unlikely that the same person would be making such an adjustment across every track around North America. And even if this were the case, it is impossible to believe that such adjustments would be consistently administered. And finally, if you have a human making such adjustments, some could speculate that such a person might have something to gain from a future wager by altering the number in a way to give said person an advantage at the betting window. The proper place for the desire to make adjustments relative to a gut feel is in the programming process. I said it earlier. This is where art meets science. Such adjustments should be thought through and tested over a large number of races, applying such adjustments in exactly the same programmatic way to each instant. And finally, figures can be improved over time with greater detail of the source data itself. I already touched on wind velocity and direction as a factor that we can directly reflect in the normalization of finishing times. I mentioned other weather factors, such as humidity and dew point, that could have an effect on speed. Anything that could change significantly during the course of a race car would be fair game to measure and study to see its effects on times and figures. When such additional elements are recorded at the track level, you can be certain we will study them, and if appropriate, will reflect them in the derivation of our speed figures. The last technical item I wanted to mention was that of testing. We never stop trying to make our figures better. But what does that mean? By better, I mean more accurate in predicting the future. Speed figures and the related class and speed ratings are used by handicappers as tools to help them predict the future. That is what handicapping is all about. So to that end, we revisit our algorithms, and when we think we have a better method, we test it against our current methods. Our current method is therefore our baseline, and we judge everything against that. Exactly how one measures such change is not that important as long as it is somewhat logical and consistent. We have looked at simulating wagering on the horse with the highest last speed figure to win or be in the money. We have also simulated such wagers based upon an average of figures, or say the top 3 of the last 5 figures within a given time frame. As it turned out, the particulars of the testing methodology did not matter, as all of those tests told us about the same thing: whether the tweak to the programming improved the efficacy of the number with respect to its predictive nature or not. So not only do we try to improve our figures and measure this through testing, but we use such testing to see how we rate compared to other figures on the market. I can tell you this in no uncertain terms, that by using the testing methods described, there are no figures that outperform the Equibase Speed Figure. And our quest to improve what we already have is never ending. Before I leave you with a short video, you should feel free to send me an email with any questions or comments you might have on the topic of speed figures. Yep, that is me in the photo. For those that don't know me, I am an avid amateur harness driver. So at least with respect to harness racing, I actually live and breathe the numbers and actually have a little influence on them, at least with respect to the horses I drive. So I am going to leave you here with a short video that I hope you find entertaining. Thanks for your interest in TrackMaster.
The USA represented by David Siegel, who, it says here, occupation administrator. Well, you know what he administrates? TrackMaster, the past performances we use for all of our harness tracks. So actually, TVG is a client of TrackMaster, and David Siegel is their main guy, CEO, president, and a very, very accomplished driver. He is representing the USA tonight in the first and second races at Maywood. We're going to show them to you. Those are...
First over here, top of the stretch, Heath and Gavin Cook looking to go all the way. And now Antonio Valente and Solid Golding it. They'll get a look up the rail. Here comes Mac BJ's Night. Here comes Call Me Roy. Call Me Roy, Mac BJ's Night coming on for David Siegel.
First race in this year's World Cup of Amateur Driving. 12 countries represented, and the USA's David Siegel kicks it off with a very exciting win coming from off the pace, wide on the final turn, 4 or 5 deep at the wire, and just getting up. Mac BJ's Night, $26 on the front end.
David Siegel will have the drive on the 3, Kenny's Dream in this one.
It's Miss Kate out in front, 15-1 odds. She continues to lead the way. She doesn't know it. She's pulling away. Miss Kate now draws clear. Christian Meyer getting all over Miss Kate as she turns for home with a commanding 3, now 4-length lead. It's Miss Kate out in front. Here comes David Siegel and Kenny's Dream closing ground. Here comes the U.S. Here's David Siegel in the United States of America, sweeping the daily double and the amateur driving champions here with a resounding victory in 2:03.
Wow, the
Take that, world
is out. Look at this. David Siegel sweeping tonight in the World Cup of Amateur Driving.